The gunshot that killed Nathan Pierce's wife echoed in his mind every morning when he woke, and every night before he slept, turning 3 years into what felt like 300. He stood at the edge of his ranch outside Carson City, Nevada, watching dust devils dance across the scrubland in the August heat of 1878. His face weathered and expressionless, a mask he had worn so long it might as well have been his actual skin. Nathan was 32 years old, though grief had aged him in ways the sun never could. His ranch hand, Tommy, often said the boss looked like he was carved from the same red rock that dotted the Nevada landscape, all hard edges and no softness left. The hands whispered about how Nathan hadn't smiled since Sarah's funeral, how he worked from sunup to sundown without a break, how he never went into town unless absolutely necessary, and how he spoke only when words were required for the running of the ranch. Sarah had been everything bright in his world. They had married when he was 26 and she was 24, two kids from neighboring ranches who had grown up riding the same trails. She had laughed easily and often, filling their modest ranch house with warmth that made even the harsh Nevada winters feel gentle. Then a fever had taken her, fast and merciless, and Nathan had buried her on a hillside overlooking the land they had dreamed of building together. The ranch still ran, but it ran on routine and necessity rather than hope. Nathan bred horses, good strong animals that fetched fair prices from the army and from ranchers throughout the territory. He was known as honest and fair, if cold, and his reputation kept business steady. But there was no joy in it, no satisfaction. It was simply what he did to keep breathing, to keep moving forward through days that all looked the same. On this particular afternoon, Nathan was mending a section of fence near the main road that ran from Carson City toward the mountains. The sun beat down relentlessly, and sweat darkened his blue work shirt as he hammered new boards into place. He had been at it for hours, alone as he preferred, when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Nathan glanced up briefly, expecting to see a neighbor, or perhaps a supply wagon heading into town. What he saw instead was a young woman driving a heavily loaded wagon that lurched unevenly on what appeared to be a damaged wheel. The wagon was piled with trunks, furniture, and household goods, all covered with canvas that had seen better days. The woman was struggling with the reins as the horses, sensing the wagon's instability, grew skittish. He straightened, watching as the wagon drew closer. The woman was focused entirely on controlling her team and seemed not to notice him at first. She was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark blonde hair tied back under a practical bonnet, and even from a distance, Nathan could see the exhaustion etched across her features. The wagon came to a stop about 20 feet from where Nathan stood, and the woman finally looked at him. Her eyes were a striking green, he noticed, clear even in the harsh sunlight. She appeared to gather herself for a moment before speaking. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice carrying a slight tremor that might have been fatigue or worry. "I am looking for directions home, that is, to a homestead, the Fitzgerald place. I was told it was near Carson City, but I have been driving for hours and nothing looks familiar from the descriptions in my uncle's letters." Nathan set down his hammer and walked toward the wagon, his boots crunching on the sun-baked earth. Up close, he could see that the woman looked more than tired. She looked nearly done in, with dark circles under her eyes and lips cracked from the dry heat. Her dress was dusty and travel-worn, and her hands gripping the reins trembled slightly. "Fitzgerald Place," Nathan repeated, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke more than a few words at a time these days. "You related to Thomas Fitzgerald?" The woman's face brightened slightly. "Yes, he was my uncle. Did you know him?" Nathan's expression remained impassive. "Knew of him. Had a homestead about 8 miles northeast of here. Heard he passed last winter." The brightness faded from the woman's face, replaced by something more complicated, sadness mixed with resignation. "Yes, he did. He left the property to me in his will. I am Grace Fitzgerald from Philadelphia. I only received word of the inheritance 3 months ago." Nathan studied her for a moment. This city woman, with her careful pronunciation and her wagon full of belongings, coming to claim a homestead she had probably never seen. He had watched enough people come west with dreams in their eyes, only to be broken by the reality of the land. Most did not last a year. "You came alone?" he asked. Grace lifted her chin slightly, a gesture that suggested pride despite her obvious exhaustion. "I did. My uncle was my last living relative. There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia." Nathan nodded once, then turned and pointed toward the northeast. Road forks about a mile ahead. Take the right fork and follow it for 7 miles. You will see a crooked pine tree standing alone. Turn north there and go another mile. That will take you to the Fitzgerald homestead. Grace followed his gesture, then looked back at him. Thank you. I am grateful for your help. She paused, then added, Your ranch, is it nearby? You are standing at the edge of it, Nathan said. Main house is about a half mile that way. He pointed south. Grace nodded, then hesitated. Nathan could see her weighing something in her mind, gathering courage. Finally, she spoke again. Sir, I wonder if I might impose on you further. My wagon wheel is damaged. I did not want to stop, as I have been anxious to reach my destination, but I fear it may not last another 8 miles. Do you have someone who might take a look at it? I can pay. Nathan walked around to examine the wheel in question. It was worse than damaged. The rim was cracked and the spokes were loose. It was a wonder she had made it this far without the whole thing collapsing. This wheel would not make it another mile, he said bluntly. Needs complete replacement. Grace's shoulders sagged. I see. Is there someone in Carson City who could help? How far is the town from here? 6 miles, Nathan said. But by the time you got there, this wheel would be gone, and your wagon would be wrecked. You would lose everything you were carrying. Grace was silent for a moment, and Nathan saw her blinking rapidly, fighting against tears that she clearly did not want to shed in front of a stranger. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Then what do you suggest I do? Nathan surprised himself with what came out of his mouth next. He had spent 3 years avoiding human connection, keeping people at arm's length, preferring silence and solitude to the risk of caring about anything beyond his horses and his land. But something about this woman, perhaps her obvious struggle to maintain dignity in the face of exhaustion and disappointment, stirred something in him that he thought had died with Sarah. I have a spare wheel that might fit your wagon, he heard himself say. You can bring the wagon to my ranch. I will have my man Tommy replace it. You can stay in the guest room tonight, get a proper meal and some rest, and head to your homestead in the morning. Grace stared at him, clearly surprised by the offer. That is extraordinarily kind of you, Mr. Pierce, Nathan Pierce. Mr. Pierce, I do not want to impose, but I confess I am exhausted, and your offer is more welcome than you might imagine. She paused, then added, I should tell you, I do not have much money. I spent most of what I had on the journey here and on supplies, but I can pay something for the wheel and for the accommodation. Nathan shook his head. No charge. Neighbors help neighbors out here. That is how things work. The word neighbors seemed to relax Grace slightly. It implied a future, a sense of belonging to a community. Then I accept your generosity with great thanks, Mr. Pierce. Nathan helped Grace guide the wagon slowly to his ranch, walking alongside to ensure the damaged wheel held. Tommy met them in the yard, his eyes widening at the sight of Nathan bringing home a stranger, particularly a young woman. Nathan gave brief, efficient instructions about the wheel, then showed Grace into the house. The interior was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man who lived alone and saw his home as merely a place to sleep. The furniture was functional, the walls bare except for a calendar and a few hooks for coats and hats. But it was cool inside, and Grace visibly relaxed as she stepped out of the punishing afternoon heat. Guest room is this way, Nathan said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a small room with a single bed, a dresser, and a washstand. There is water in the pitcher. Supper will be ready around 6. Thank you, Grace said. Might I ask where I could wash up properly? I have been traveling for days and feel as though I am wearing half the dust in Nevada. Nathan showed her to the small bathing room, a luxury he had added to the house because Sarah had wanted it. There was a large metal tub and a pump that brought water from the well. I will have Tommy heat some water and bring it in, he said. Grace looked as though she might cry from gratitude. You are too kind, Mr. Pierce. Nathan left her to settle in and went to check on Tommy's progress with the wheel. His ranch hand was already at work, whistling tunelessly as he examined the damaged wheel and compared it to the replacement Nathan kept in the barn. City girl? Tommy asked as Nathan approached. Philadelphia, Nathan confirmed. Come to claim her uncle's homestead. Tommy let out a low whistle. Thomas Fitzgerald's place? That old man let that property go to hell in his last years. House probably is not even livable. Nathan frowned. He had not seen the Fitzgerald place in over a year, but Tommy was right that Thomas had been in declining health for some time before his death. The homestead had never been much to begin with, a small cabin and a few outbuildings on hard land. "How bad?" Nathan asked. Tommy shrugged. "Saw it a few months back when I was hunting. Roof looked like it was half caved in, windows broken. Didn't go inside, but I cannot imagine it was pretty." Nathan felt a flicker of something in his chest, an unwelcome stirring of concern. He tried to push it away. Grace Fitzgerald was not his problem. He would help her fix her wagon, give her a meal and a bed for the night, and send her on her way in the morning. What happened after that was not his concern. But even as he thought it, he knew he was lying to himself. He could not, in good conscience, send a woman alone to a place that might be uninhabitable. Sarah would have been appalled at the very idea. Nathan spent the next few hours doing his evening chores, feeding the horses, checking on a pregnant mare, securing the barn for the night. His movements were automatic, practiced through years of routine. But his mind kept drifting back to the woman in his house, the first guest he had entertained since Sarah's funeral. When he came inside as the sun was setting, he found Grace in the kitchen. She had changed into a clean dress, a simple gray cotton that suited her, and her hair was damp and hung in a long braid down her back. She looked infinitely better than she had when she arrived, though the exhaustion still showed around her eyes. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the stove where something was cooking. "I felt I should earn my keep, and I found some vegetables and salt pork. I am making a stew." Nathan was about to say she did not need to earn anything, but the smell coming from the pot made his stomach clench with sudden hunger. He had been eating his own mediocre cooking for 3 years. Simple fare that served to keep him alive, and nothing more. Whatever Grace was making smelled infinitely better. "Appreciated," he said simply. They ate at the small kitchen table, and Nathan was struck by how strange it felt to share a meal with someone. Tommy always ate in the bunkhouse, preferring his own company in the evenings. Nathan had grown accustomed to the silence of solitary meals. "This is very good," Nathan said after a few bites. It was more than good. It was the best thing he had tasted in years. Grace smiled, a small, tired smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. My mother taught me to cook. She said it was essential for a woman to be able to prepare a proper meal." Her expression grew sad. "She died when I was 16. My father followed 2 years later. That is when I went to live with my aunt, my mother's sister. She passed last year." "I am sorry," Nathan said, and meant it. He understood loss. "I seem to be someone people leave," Grace said quietly. "Not by choice, I know, but the result is the same. When my uncle's lawyer wrote to tell me about the inheritance, I saw it as a chance to start fresh, to have something that was mine, a place where I could build a new life." She looked at Nathan. "I suppose that sounds foolish to you." "No," Nathan said. "It does not sound foolish." They ate in silence for a while. Then Grace spoke again. "You mentioned you have horses. Is that your business?" "Breed and train them," Nathan confirmed. "Mostly sell to the army, some to ranchers. Good stock." "Have you been ranching long?" "Since I was 24, 8 years now." Grace tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You said neighbors help neighbors out here, but you seem like a man who prefers to be alone." Nathan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. It was a perceptive observation, more perceptive than he was comfortable with. "I manage," he said finally. Grace nodded, letting the subject drop. After they finished eating, Nathan told her about the damaged state of her uncle's homestead, based on what Tommy had reported. He watched her face as the information sank in, saw the hope drain from her eyes to be replaced by quiet despair. "I see," she said softly. "Of course it would be too much to hope that something might be easy." "You can stay here tonight," Nathan said. "Tomorrow I will take you to the homestead so you can see for yourself. Then you can decide what you want to do." Grace looked at him. "What do you think I should do, Mr. Pierce?" Nathan hesitated. He wanted to tell her to go back to Philadelphia, to find some other life in some place that would not break her the way this land broke people. But he saw something in her face, a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded him of Sarah's determination when she had decided on something. "I think you should see the place first," he said. "Make your decision from there." That night, Nathan lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Grace moving quietly in the guest room, could imagine her lying awake as well, worrying about what the morning would bring. He told himself that his concern was purely practical, the same concern he would feel for anyone facing hardship. But he knew, deep in the parts of himself he had tried to wall off, that it was more than that. Grace reminded him of something he had lost, not just Sarah herself, but the sense of connection to another human being, the feeling that someone else's welfare mattered. For 3 years, he had existed in a gray fog of grief and routine, going through the motions of life without truly living. Grace's arrival had cracked something open, let in a sliver of light that was both painful and oddly welcome. Morning came with its usual harsh brightness, the Nevada sun spilling across the land like liquid gold. Nathan was up early as always, but when he came into the kitchen, he found Grace already there, dressed in a practical riding skirt and blouse, her hair tied back sensibly. "I thought we should start early," she said, "before the heat becomes unbearable." Nathan nodded. "I will hitch up your wagon. Tommy got the wheel replaced last night." They drove the 8 miles to the Fitzgerald homestead in relative silence. Grace focused on managing the team, Nathan riding alongside on his horse, a big bay gelding named Cooper. The land they passed through was typical Nevada high desert, sagebrush and scrub grass, punctuated by rocky outcroppings and the occasional twisted juniper. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, but Nathan wondered what it looked like to Grace's eastern eyes. When they reached the homestead, Nathan saw Grace's face fall. The place was worse than Tommy had reported. The cabin's roof had indeed partially collapsed, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. The windows were all broken, and sagebrush had grown up around the foundation. The barn was in slightly better shape, but not by much. The whole place had an air of desolation and abandonment. Grace climbed down from the wagon and walked slowly toward the cabin. Nathan followed, watching as she pushed open the door and stepped inside. He heard her sharp intake of breath and knew it was bad. The interior was a disaster. Rain had gotten in through the damaged roof, warping the floorboards and leaving water stains on the walls. Mice had made nests in the corners, and the whole place smelled of rot and decay. The few pieces of furniture that remained were broken or unusable. Grace stood in the middle of the single room, turning slowly to take it all in. Nathan saw her shoulders begin to shake and realized she was crying, trying to hide it from him, but unable to stop. Something in his chest clenched tight. "Miss Fitzgerald," he said quietly. She turned away from him, wiping at her face with her hands. "I am sorry. I am not usually so weak." "You are not weak," Nathan said. "You are disappointed. There is a difference." Grace drew a shaky breath. "I spent everything I had to come here. I have no money to return to Philadelphia, and even if I did, I have nothing to return to. This homestead was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to build something of my own." She laughed bitterly. "What a fool I was!" Nathan moved closer, not quite within arm's reach, but near enough that she could sense his presence. "You are not a fool. You could not have known the state of the place." "What am I supposed to do now?" Grace asked, her voice small and lost. Nathan made a decision then, one that would change both their lives, though he did not fully realize it at the time. "You will come back to my ranch," he said. "Stay in the guest room. I need someone to cook and keep house. Tommy and I are useless at both. You can work for room and board, save up some money, then you can decide what to do next." Grace turned to face him, her eyes red from crying, but searching his face intently. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." Nathan did not have a good answer for that, at least not one he was willing to say out loud. "Because you need help, and I can provide it," he said finally. "That is reason enough." Grace studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I accept, but I will work hard, Mr. Pierce. I will earn my keep. I promise you that." They loaded what few salvageable items there were from the cabin into Grace's wagon, mostly her own belongings that she had brought from Philadelphia. As they worked, Nathan found himself watching her, noting the way she moved with efficient purpose despite her disappointment, the way she set her jaw when lifting something heavy, determined not to ask for help unless absolutely necessary. The ride back to Nathan's ranch was quieter than the ride out, but it was a different kind of silence, less tense. When they arrived, Nathan helped Grace carry her belongings into the guest room, which he told her was now hers for as long as she needed it. Over the following days, a routine developed. Grace proved to be true to her word, working tirelessly around the house. She cleaned corners that had not seen attention in 3 years, cooked meals that reminded Nathan what real food tasted like, and even took over the garden that Sarah had once tended and that Nathan had let go to weeds. Nathan watched her work with a mixture of admiration and concern. She drove herself hard, as though trying to prove her worth, and he found himself wanting to tell her to slow down, to rest, but he was not sure how to say such things without overstepping. Tommy noticed the changes too. "Place looks better," he commented one evening as he and Nathan were checking on the horses. "And whatever she cooked for supper smells damn good. You planning on keeping her around?" "She is working for room and board," Nathan said stiffly, "until she saves enough to figure out what she wants to do next." Tommy gave him a knowing look that Nathan chose to ignore. He was not ready to examine too closely why he had made the offer to Grace, or why he found himself looking forward to mealtimes when they would sit together at the kitchen table and talk about their days. Grace, for her part, seemed to be settling in. The exhaustion gradually left her eyes, replaced by something more vital. She explored the ranch when her work was done, walking the perimeter, visiting the horses, and sitting sometimes on the porch in the evenings, as the sun set over the distant mountains. One evening, about 2 weeks after Grace had arrived, Nathan found her in the barn, standing in front of the stall where his pregnant mare was kept. Grace was stroking the mare's nose, talking to her in a low, soothing voice. "Her name is Daisy," Nathan said from the doorway. Grace jumped slightly, then smiled when she saw him. "She is beautiful. When is she due?" "Another month or so," Nathan said, moving to stand beside Grace. "This will be her first foal. I am hoping for a good, strong colt." "Have you always loved horses?" Grace asked. "Since I was a boy," Nathan said. "My father was a horse trader. I learned everything from him." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both watching the mare. Then Grace spoke again. "Mr. Pierce, may I ask you something personal?" Nathan tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. I may not answer. Tommy mentioned once that you had a wife. He said she passed away. I just wanted to say that I am sorry for your loss." Nathan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the ache that never fully went away. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Her name was Sarah. She died 3 years ago from a fever." "You must have loved her very much," Grace said softly. "I did," Nathan said. Then, surprising himself, he continued. "I still do, I suppose. I do not think that kind of love just stops." Grace nodded. "When my mother died, my father never remarried. He said he had already had his great love, and once was enough for a lifetime. I think I understand that now, in a way I did not when I was younger." Nathan looked at her. "Do you believe that? That a person only gets one great love?" Grace considered the question. "I think I believed it when my father said it, but now I wonder if perhaps love is not so limited. Perhaps the heart has more capacity than we give it credit for." It was a generous thought, Nathan reflected, and one that made him uncomfortable in ways he could not quite articulate. He changed the subject, asking Grace about her work in the garden, and they talked of easier things until it was time to go inside for supper. As the weeks passed, Nathan found himself changing in small ways. He caught himself almost smiling one morning when Grace made a joke over breakfast. He started working shorter days, coming in earlier so he could spend time on the porch in the evenings, while Grace sat nearby, mending clothes or shelling peas. He began to look forward to her presence in ways that both comforted and unsettled him. Grace was changing too. The city pallor left her skin, replaced by a healthy glow from working outdoors. She grew more confident in her movements, more at ease with the land and the routines of ranch life. She learned to ride, borrowing one of Nathan's gentler horses, and would sometimes accompany him on his rounds, asking questions about the horses and the ranch operations. One afternoon in late September, nearly 6 weeks after Grace had arrived, Nathan was working with a young stallion in the breaking pen when he heard Grace cry out. He dropped the lead rope and ran toward the sound, his heart pounding with sudden fear. He found Grace near the well, her hand clutched to her chest, her face pale. "What happened?" he demanded, his hands hovering near her, not quite touching, but ready to help. "A rattlesnake," Grace gasped. "It was by the well. It struck at me, but I jumped back. I think it missed, but it startled me so badly." Nathan looked around quickly, spotted the snake coiled near the base of the well, and dispatched it with a quick, efficient strike of the shovel that leaned against the nearby fence. Then he turned back to Grace. "Let me see your hand," he said. Grace held out her hand, and Nathan examined it carefully. There were no marks, no signs of a bite. But Grace was trembling, the shock and fear catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Without thinking, Nathan put his arm around her shoulders and guided her to the porch. "Sit," he said firmly. "I will get you some water." He brought her a cup from the kitchen, and she drank it gratefully, her hands still shaking slightly. Nathan sat beside her on the porch steps, closer than he had sat to anyone in 3 years. "I am sorry for being so foolish," Grace said after a moment. "I should have been more careful." "You were not foolish," Nathan said. "Rattlesnakes are dangerous. You reacted quickly. That is what saved you." Grace set down the cup and looked at him. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I heard you running." Nathan realized his hand was still on her shoulder. He should move it, he knew, but he found he did not want to. "Of course I came," he said quietly. "I would not let anything happen to you." Grace's eyes met his, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that neither had spoken aloud, but that both knew were growing between them. Nathan felt his heart beating harder, not from the adrenaline of the snake encounter, but from Grace's nearness, from the sudden realization that he cared for her in ways that went far beyond employer and employee, beyond simple friendship. He withdrew his hand then, suddenly afraid of what he was feeling. "You should rest," he said, standing abruptly. "I will finish up the afternoon chores." He left before Grace could respond, striding back toward the barn with long, purposeful steps. But he could not escape the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them, that a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. That night at supper, the air between them felt charged with unspoken words. Grace seemed subdued, and Nathan found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she was not looking. Afterward, instead of sitting on the porch as had become their habit, Nathan excused himself and went to his room, claiming tiredness. He lay awake long into the night, his mind churning. He had not expected to feel anything for anyone, again after Sarah. He had assumed that part of him had died with her, that he would spend the rest of his life in the gray half-existence he had inhabited for the past 3 years. But Grace had changed that, had awakened something in him that was both wonderful and terrifying. He felt guilty, as though his growing feelings for Grace were a betrayal of Sarah's memory. But he also felt alive in a way he had not felt in so long, and that vitality was seductive, pulling him towards something new, even as his loyalty to the past held him back. The next morning, Nathan was up before dawn, throwing himself into work with an intensity that made Tommy raise his eyebrows. He avoided the house until midday, when hunger finally drove him inside. Grace was preparing lunch, and she looked up when he entered, her expression uncertain. "Mr. Pierce, have I done something to offend you?" she asked directly. Nathan stopped, caught off guard by the question. "No. Why would you think that?" "You have been avoiding me," Grace said simply, "since yesterday afternoon. If I have overstepped in some way, or if you would prefer that I make other arrangements, please tell me honestly." "You have not overstepped," Nathan said quickly. Too quickly, he realized, revealing more than he intended. He drew a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I have been thinking is all about the future, about what comes next." Grace set down the knife she had been using to slice bread. "I have been thinking about that too. I have saved a little money from selling some preserves in town. Not much, but enough to perhaps rent a room in Carson City. I could find work there, maybe as a seamstress or a cook. I do not want to impose on your hospitality forever." Nathan felt a sharp stab of something that might have been panic at the thought of Grace leaving. "You are not imposing," he said. "You have more than earned your keep. This place runs better with you here." "But it is not right for me to stay indefinitely," Grace said. "People in town are already starting to talk. When I went to sell the preserves, the shopkeeper's wife made some pointed comments about a young woman living alone with a bachelor rancher." Nathan's jaw tightened. He knew how small towns worked, how quickly reputations could be damaged by gossip and speculation. "What did you tell her?" "That I am your housekeeper, which is the truth," Grace said. "But I do not think she believed me, or rather, she believed me, but thought there must be something more to it." "Is there?" Nathan asked before he could stop himself. "Something more to it?" Grace looked at him steadily. "I think you know the answer to that, Mr. Pierce." Nathan's heart was pounding now. "I do not know what to do with this," he said honestly. "I love my wife. I thought that part of my life was over." "I know," Grace said softly, "and I would never want to replace her or make you feel as though you had to forget her. But Nathan," and it was the first time she had used his given name, "I care for you. I have tried not to, knowing that you might not be ready for such feelings, but I cannot help it. You have been kinder to me than anyone in my life, and somewhere along the way. Gratitude became something more. Nathan closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He stood in front of Grace, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to smell the lavender soap she used. "I care for you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It scares me how much I care." Grace reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle against his bearded cheek. "We do not have to be scared," she said. "We can take this slowly, see where it leads." Nathan covered her hand with his own. "I have not smiled since Sarah's funeral," he said. "Did you know that? 3 years without smiling. But you, Grace Fitzgerald, you make me want to smile again." And then, as if to prove his words, Nathan felt his lips curve upward, felt the unfamiliar pull of muscles long unused. It was not a big smile, not yet, but it was real and genuine, and directed at the woman standing in front of him. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, Nathan could tell. "There you are," she whispered. "I have been waiting to see that." Nathan kissed her then, a gentle kiss that held the promise of healing and new beginnings. Grace leaned into him, her arms coming up to circle his neck, and for the first time in 3 years, Nathan felt truly present in the moment, not haunted by the past or dreading the future, but simply here, now, with this remarkable woman in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan rested his forehead against Grace's. "I do not want you to leave," he said. "I want you to stay here with me, but I want to do this properly. Will you allow me to court you, Grace?" Grace laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, Nathan Pierce. I will allow you to court me." The courting that followed was unconventional by most standards, given that they were already living under the same roof, but Nathan was determined to do things right. He took Grace into Carson City for dinner at the hotel restaurant, enduring the curious stares and whispered conversations of the other diners. He bought her small gifts, a length of blue fabric that matched her eyes, a book of poetry that he thought she might enjoy. They took rides together in the early evenings, exploring the land around the ranch, and Nathan showed Grace the places that were special to him: the hidden spring where he had proposed to Sarah, the overlook where he sometimes went to think. He told Grace about his life with Sarah, about their hopes and dreams, and Grace listened without jealousy, understanding that Sarah was part of Nathan's history and always would be. Grace, in turn, told Nathan about her life in Philadelphia, about the loneliness she had felt after losing her parents, about the sense of being adrift and without purpose. She told him about her dreams for the future, modest dreams of having a home and family, of belonging somewhere. "You belong here," Nathan told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "With me, if you will have me." "I will have you," Grace said, taking his hand, "for as long as you will have me." As October turned to November, Nathan knew it was time to make their arrangement more permanent. The gossip in town had not died down, and Nathan could see that it bothered Grace, even though she tried to hide it. More than that, though, Nathan knew in his heart that he wanted to marry Grace, wanted to make her his wife in truth, and not just in the eyes of nosy townspeople. On a cool November evening, Nathan took Grace to the hillside where Sarah was buried. Grace had not been there before, and Nathan saw her hesitate when she realized where they were going. "It is all right," Nathan said quietly. "I want you to see this." They stood together in front of Sarah's grave, simple and well-tended, marked by a wooden cross with her name carved into it. Nathan was silent for a long moment, then spoke, addressing Sarah as much as Grace. "I loved you," he said. "I will always love you. You were my first great love, and nothing will ever change that. But you are gone, Sarah, and I am still here. I have been given a second chance at happiness, and I think you would want me to take it." He turned to Grace, who was crying softly. "I think you would have liked each other," he said. "You are both strong women who know your own minds." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple gold band. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to a woman worthy of wearing it. Grace Fitzgerald, you are that woman. Will you marry me?" Grace looked at the ring, then at Nathan, then at Sarah's grave. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Are you truly sure this is what you want?" "I am sure," Nathan said. "I want to build a life with you. Grace, I want to fill that house with laughter and children and all the noise and chaos that comes with living. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you. So, yes, I am sure." Grace held out her hand, trembling slightly. "Then yes, Nathan Pierce, I will marry you." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the November wind whispered around them. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan placed his hand on Sarah's gravestone for a moment, a silent farewell and thank you, then took Grace's hand and led her back down the hillside toward home. They were married 3 weeks later, in late November of 1878, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Carson City. Tommy served as best man, and the wife of the general store owner, despite her earlier gossip, stood up as Grace's witness. The preacher was efficient and kind, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Grace with a tenderness that made several of the elderly ladies in attendance dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The wedding night was gentle and sweet, Nathan careful with Grace, mindful that this was new territory for both of them together. Grace was nervous but willing, and Nathan was patient, and by the end, they lay tangled together in the big bed that had once felt too empty, both of them feeling found in a way neither had expected. Life as a married couple fell into new rhythms. Grace moved her belongings from the guest room into Nathan's room, which they now called their room. She put small touches throughout the house, curtains in the windows, a quilt on the back of the sofa, flowers in vases when she could find them. The house began to feel like a home again, warm and lived in. Nathan found himself changing in larger ways too. He laughed more easily, joked with Tommy, took time off from work to spend afternoons with Grace. The hard edges that grief had carved into him began to soften, not disappearing entirely, but becoming more rounded, more human. Winter came to Nevada, cold and clear, and Nathan and Grace spent the long evenings by the fire, reading or talking, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Grace proved to be good with the ranch accounts, better than Nathan had ever been, and she took over the bookkeeping with an efficiency that impressed him. In February, Daisy the mare gave birth to a strong colt, and Grace was there for the birthing, helping Nathan and showing no squeamishness at the messy business of new life. When the colt finally stood on his wobbly legs and took his first nursing, Grace turned to Nathan with such joy on her face that Nathan felt his heart expand with love for her. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. Nathan thought for a moment. "Hope," he said. "We will call him Hope." Grace smiled and kissed him. "Hope it is." Spring arrived with its usual dramatic shift, the desert suddenly blooming with wildflowers, purple lupines, and yellow desert marigolds painting the landscape in unexpected color. Grace delighted in the transformation, taking long walks to gather flowers, which she brought back to fill every available vase and jar in the house. It was in early April that Grace came to Nathan with news that would change their lives once more. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, when Grace took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Nathan froze, his mind struggling to process the information. "A baby?" he repeated. "Yes," Grace said. "I have been suspecting for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. I went to see the doctor in Carson City today. He confirmed it. The baby should come in early November." Nathan felt a rush of emotions so intense he could not name them all. Joy, certainly, but also fear and a touch of that old grief. He and Sarah had wanted children, but had never been blessed with them in their brief marriage. Grace seemed to sense his complicated feelings. "Are you happy?" she asked, a note of uncertainty in her voice. "I am happy," Nathan said, and realized it was true. The joy was stronger than the fear, the hope more powerful than the grief. "I am so happy, Grace." He pulled her into his arms and held her close, feeling the miracle of new life between them. "A baby," he said again, this time with wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace bloomed with it, growing rounder and more radiant as spring turned to summer. Nathan hovered, probably more than he should have, worrying about her working too hard, making sure she rested, driving her to distraction with his concern. "I am not made of glass," Grace told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can hang clothes." But Nathan could not help himself. The thought of losing Grace the way he had lost Sarah terrified him in ways he could not articulate. Grace seemed to understand, though, and bore his fussing with patience and occasional amusement. In September, they began preparing the small room off their bedroom as a nursery. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets while Nathan built a cradle, working in the evenings by lamplight to craft something sturdy and beautiful. Tommy contributed a rocking horse he had carved, surprisingly delicate work from his rough hands. The baby came on a cold November night, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Nathan sent Tommy racing to town to fetch the doctor while he stayed with Grace, holding her hand through the contractions, terrified and awed in equal measure. The doctor arrived in time, thank God, and after hours of labor that tested both Grace and Nathan to their limits, a baby's cry filled the house. Nathan, who had been relegated to the hallway for the final stages, rushed back in at the sound. "A boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy." Grace, exhausted and radiant, reached for the baby, and the doctor placed him in her arms. Nathan moved to the bedside, looking down at his son, this tiny, perfect human who had somehow come from his and Grace's love. "Hello, little one," Grace whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Nathan touched the baby's tiny hand, felt the miniature fingers curl around his own large, calloused one. He looked at Grace, saw the tears streaming down her face, felt his own eyes burning. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. Nathan had thought about this, had turned the question over in his mind for months. There were family names to consider, traditional names, strong names. But, in the end, one name kept coming back to him. "Samuel," he said. "Samuel Nathan Pierce. Samuel means heard by God, and I think God heard our prayers when he sent us to each other." "Samuel," Grace repeated, trying it out. "Yes, that is perfect." The first year of Samuel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, first smiles, and the ordinary miracles of a baby growing and changing. Nathan discovered depths of love he had not known he possessed, a fierce protective tenderness that made him understand his own father in new ways. Grace took to motherhood with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. She nursed Samuel, soothed him when he cried, marveled with Nathan over each new milestone. The ranch continued to run, with Tommy taking on more responsibilities so Nathan could spend time with his family. One evening, when Samuel was 6 months old, Nathan found Grace on the porch, rocking their son to sleep. He sat beside her, and they watched the sun set in comfortable silence, Samuel's soft breathing a sweet counterpoint to the evening sounds of the ranch. "Do you ever think about how we met?" Grace asked softly. "How I asked you for directions home?" Nathan smiled, something he did often now. "I think about it all the time. How lost you looked, how determined." "I was looking for a home," Grace said, "but I did not know what I was really looking for until I found you." Nathan put his arm around her, careful not to jostle Samuel. "You gave me my life back," he said. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You reminded me how to live." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other, I think." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. Samuel stirred and made a small sound, but did not wake. Nathan looked at his wife and son, at the ranch spread out before them, at the life they had built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Time continued its march, as it always does. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler, with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. Grace became pregnant again when Samuel was 2, and this time Nathan was less frightened and more simply joyful. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1882, a tiny red-faced bundle with a surprisingly loud cry for someone so small. They named her Rose after Nathan's mother, and if Nathan had thought he understood love before, holding his daughter made him realize there were always new depths to discover. The ranch prospered, Nathan's reputation for quality horses grew, and he was able to expand his operation, hiring additional hands and improving the facilities. Grace's preserves and the vegetables from her ever-expanding garden brought in additional income, and they began to save money, planning for their children's futures. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Grace back to the hillside, where Sarah was buried. They had not been there together since the night he proposed, though Nathan still visited occasionally, keeping the grave tended. Samuel and Rose were with Tommy back at the ranch, giving Nathan and Grace a rare afternoon alone. They stood hand in front of the weathered wooden cross, comfortable in the silence. "I still miss her," Nathan said. I do not think I will ever stop missing her." "You should not stop," Grace said. "She was important to you. She shaped who you are." Nathan turned to face his wife. "Do you know that I have not had a single nightmare about her death in over 3 years? I used to have them almost every night, reliving that day, watching her slip away. But since we have been together, since we have had the children, I dream of the good times instead. I dream of her laughing." Grace squeezed his hand. "That is how it should be. The good memories should be stronger than the pain." Nathan looked back at the grave. "I think she would approve of you, of us. I think she would be glad that I found happiness again." "I think so too," Grace said softly. They stood for a few moments longer, then walked back down the hillside toward home, toward the life they had built, toward the sound of their children playing and the warmth of the house they shared. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of growing children. Samuel grew tall and lean, fascinated by horses like his father. Rose proved to be more interested in books and learning, often found curled up in corners reading everything she could get her hands on. When Samuel was 8 and Rose was 6, Grace became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and Nathan worried constantly. But Grace weathered it with her usual strength, and in the winter of 1887 they welcomed another son, whom they named Thomas after Grace's uncle, the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together. Tommy, the ranch hand, was so touched by the gesture that he cried openly, much to everyone's amusement and his own embarrassment. He doted on young Thomas, carved him toys, and taught him to ride as soon as the boy could sit a horse. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the horse sales were slow and money was tight. Samuel broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 10, giving Nathan and Grace several hours of terror until the doctor said it and assured them he would heal fine. Rose came down with scarlet fever at 12, and for 2 weeks, Nathan and Grace took turns sitting up with her through the night, praying she would survive. She did, though it left her weakened for months afterward. But through it all, Nathan and Grace had each other, had the family they had built, had the love that had grown from that chance meeting on a dusty Nevada road. On difficult days, Nathan would remember Grace asking him for directions home, remember thinking she was just another city woman who would not last. He had been so wrong, and he thanked God regularly for his mistake. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Grace took a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation without the children. Tommy and his new wife, a widow from Carson City whom he had finally worked up the courage to court, stayed at the ranch to watch Samuel, Rose, and Thomas. In the city, Nathan and Grace walked along the waterfront, ate at fancy restaurants, and stayed in a hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights. It was exciting and exotic, but by the 3rd day both of them were homesick for the wide open spaces and the clear desert sky. On their last evening in the city, as they walked back to the hotel after dinner, Grace stopped suddenly and turned to Nathan. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "Taking in a stranger, turning your life upside down?" Nathan pulled her close, not caring that they were on a public street. "Not for one single second," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Pierce. You and our children are my entire world." Grace smiled, that radiant smile that still had the power to make Nathan's heart skip a beat. "Good. Because I was thinking that maybe, when we get home, we might consider expanding the house. Thomas is getting bigger, and it might be nice for the children to have their own rooms." Nathan laughed. "We can expand the house. We can build an entire new wing if you want. Whatever makes you happy." "You make me happy," Grace said simply. "You and our family, that is all I need." They returned to Carson City the next day, and the children rushed out to meet them, full of stories about what they had done while their parents were away. Nathan scooped Rose up in his arms, ruffled Samuel's hair, and lifted Thomas onto his shoulders, feeling complete in a way he had never imagined possible after Sarah's death. The house expansion began that spring, and by summer they had added 3 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Grace was in her element, planning and organizing, making the expanded house into an even warmer home. Samuel, now 13, began to take on more responsibilities with the horses, showing a natural talent for training that impressed even Nathan. Rose, at 11, announced that she wanted to be a teacher, and Nathan and Grace agreed to send her to the new school that had opened in Carson City. Thomas, at 5, was still deciding what he wanted to be, oscillating daily between a horse trader like his father and a shopkeeper like the friendly man who ran the general store. As Nathan approached his 50th birthday, he found himself reflecting on the journey his life had taken. The young man who had been so broken by grief, who had thought his life was essentially over at 29, would hardly recognize the man he had become. He was a husband, father to 3 thriving children, owner of a successful ranch, and an active member of the Carson City community. More than that, though, he was happy. Not every day, not every moment, but with a deep underlying contentment that colored everything else. He had loved and lost, then loved and found, and both experiences had shaped him into the man he was. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Nathan found a letter in his nightstand drawer. He had written it years ago, not long after marrying Grace, and had forgotten about it until now. He opened it and read his own words from more than a decade past. To whoever reads this, if anyone ever does. Today I married Grace Fitzgerald, a woman who stumbled into my life when she asked for directions to a home that turned out not to exist. I think perhaps she was always meant to find her home with me instead. I am writing this because I want to remember how I feel right now, in this moment when everything is new and hopeful. I want to remember that love is possible even after loss, that hearts can heal, that life goes on. If I ever forget, if I ever take this miracle for granted, I want these words to remind me. Nathan smiled and tucked the letter back in the drawer. He did not need the reminder. Every day with Grace, every moment with their children, was its own reminder of how blessed he was. Grace emerged from the bathing room, saw Nathan's expression, and raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About directions," Nathan said. "About a lost woman asking a broken man for help finding her way home." Grace climbed into bed beside him. "I was not lost," she said. "I was exactly where I needed to be." Nathan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the familiar weight of her in his arms. "We both were," he said. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the way they had fallen asleep every night for more than a decade, the way they would fall asleep for decades more to come. The children grew and flourished. Samuel eventually took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, freeing Nathan to spend more time with Grace and Thomas. Rose went to teaching college in Sacramento and returned to Carson City to teach at the local school, where she was beloved by her students. Thomas surprised everyone by developing a talent for business and eventually opened a horse trading office in Reno, expanding the reach of the Pierce Ranch beyond anything Nathan had imagined. Nathan and Grace grew older together, their hair going gray, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They took pride in their grandchildren, of which there were eventually 8, all of them frequent visitors to the ranch that had become the center of the Pierce family legacy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and Nathan stood on the porch watching them all, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Grace came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his with the ease of long practice. They were both in their 60s now, both well aware that they had more years behind them than ahead, but neither felt any regret. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked, the question she had asked him countless times over the years. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Nathan said. "That I should have been lost when Sarah died, but instead, I found you. That everything good in my life traces back to that afternoon, when a stubborn woman asked me for directions." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me more than directions that day. You gave me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have." "We gave each other those things," Nathan corrected. "We built this together." Samuel called to them then, announcing that dinner was ready, and Nathan and Grace went inside to join their family. The long table was crowded with people, multiple generations of Pierces and the spouses who had married into the family. Grace said the blessing, her voice steady and clear, thanking God for food and family and the many years of happiness they had been granted. As they ate, Nathan looked around the table at these people who existed, because he had once made the choice to help a stranger, because he had been willing to open his heart to love again, even when it had seemed impossible. His eyes met Grace's across the table, and she smiled at him, that same smile that had first cracked the ice around his frozen heart all those years ago. After dinner, as the sun was setting, Nathan and Grace slipped away from the crowd and walked out to the hillside where Sarah was buried. They had made this pilgrimage together many times over the years, and it had become a tradition on important occasions. The wooden cross had been replaced long ago with a proper headstone that Nathan and Grace had commissioned together. They stood in front of it, hand in hand, as they had so many times before. "Thank you," Nathan said softly, addressing Sarah. "Thank you for the years we had, and thank you for not holding me back when it was time to move forward. I hope you know that I kept my promise. I built a good life. I was happy." Grace squeezed his hand, but said nothing. There was nothing that needed to be said. They stood for a few more minutes, then walked back down the hillside toward the house, toward the sound of their family, toward the life they had made together. The sun was setting, painting the Nevada sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and in the distance they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Nathan stopped and pulled Grace into his arms. "I love you," he said, words he said every day, but that never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Grace replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." They kissed, a sweet, gentle kiss of two people who knew each other completely, then continued walking toward home. Years later, when Nathan was 70 and Grace was 68, they sat together on that same porch, watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across Nevada and California, living their own lives but staying connected to the ranch and to each other. Nathan's health was failing. They both knew it, though neither spoke of it often. His heart was weak, the doctor said, worn out from 70 years of living. He tired easily now, spent more time sitting than working, but he was not unhappy. He had lived a full life, had been blessed beyond measure. Grace sat beside him in the rocking chair Samuel had made for her 50th birthday. Her hair completely white now, but her green eyes still clear and sharp. She was knitting something for their newest great-grandchild, her hands moving with the automatic precision of long practice. "Do you remember the day we met?" Nathan asked, a question he had asked before but never tired of hearing answered. Grace smiled. "I remember being so tired I could barely think straight. I remember seeing you standing by that fence and thinking you looked like the most serious man I had ever seen. I remember how your voice was rough, like you did not use it much." "I did not," Nathan said. "I had forgotten how to talk to people, how to connect. You taught me that again." "You taught me that I was stronger than I thought," Grace said. "That I could build a life from nothing, that I could survive and even thrive in a place that seemed so foreign at first." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower toward the mountains. Nathan felt tired, so tired, but also at peace. He had done what he set out to do all those years ago. He had honored Sarah's memory by living fully, by loving completely, by building something lasting. "Grace," he said softly. She looked at him, saw something in his face, and set down her knitting. "Yes, my love. If I go first," Nathan said, "I need you to know that these years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You saved me when I needed saving, and then you loved me well enough that I could save myself." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "And if I go first, I need you to know that asking you for directions was the bravest and best thing I ever did. Everything good in my life came from that moment." Nathan took her hand, feeling the familiar shape of her fingers, the wedding ring that had not left her hand in 40 years. "We had a good run, did we not?" "The best," Grace agreed. "The very best." Nathan lived for 3 more years, long enough to see another great-grandchild born, long enough to celebrate his 43rd wedding anniversary, long enough to tell his children and grandchildren one more time how much he loved them. He died peacefully one autumn evening, with Grace holding his hand and his children gathered around him. They buried him on the hillside next to Sarah, and Grace stood between the 2 graves of the men she had loved and marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She mourned Nathan deeply, missed him terribly, but she did not regret a single day of their life together. Grace lived for another 7 years, surrounded by family, still sharp-minded and independent until nearly the end. She spent her days working in her garden, visiting with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch of the ranch house watching the Nevada sunset. When her time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, and her children buried her on the other side of Nathan, so that he rested between his first love and his last, between past and future, between grief and joy. At the funeral, Samuel spoke about his parents' love story, about how his father had been a man frozen by grief until a stranger asked him for directions, about how that question had changed not just 2 lives but had created an entire family legacy. He talked about the importance of being open to second chances, of having the courage to love again after loss, of building something beautiful from the ashes of sorrow. The Pierce Ranch continued to operate for another 3 generations, eventually becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Nevada. The house was expanded several times more, but the original structure, the rooms where Nathan and Grace had lived and loved and raised their children, was always preserved and honored. In the town of Carson City, a small plaque was eventually placed near the spot where Nathan had first met Grace, though no one could say exactly where that had been. The plaque read simply, "In this place, a cowboy who had forgotten how to smile met a stranger who taught him to hope again. From their meeting grew the Pierce family legacy, a testament to the power of love, kindness, and second chances." But the real legacy was not in plaques or property, or even in the many descendants who carried the Pierce name. The real legacy was in the story itself, told and retold by each generation, of a woman brave enough to ask for help and a man brave enough to give it, of 2 wounded people who found healing in each other, of a love that proved it was never too late to begin again. The Nevada desert continued its eternal rhythms, harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and magnificent. The sun rose and set, the seasons turned, the years marched on. But on a hillside overlooking a prosperous ranch, 3 headstones stood together, marking the resting places of 3 people whose lives had been woven together by fate, love, and the simple act of asking for directions home. And if you stood there at sunset, when the light turned the whole world golden and the wind whispered through the sagebrush, you might almost hear the echo of laughter, the sound of children playing, the gentle murmur of 2 voices talking softly together as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. You might feel the presence of love so strong it had shaped the land itself, creating ripples that extended far beyond the lives of those who had lived it. That, in the end, was the true story, not just of Nathan and Grace, but of all of us, stumbling through our days, asking for directions, hoping to find our way home. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, we meet someone along that dusty road who not only points the way, but walks beside us, turning the journey itself into the destination, transforming a simple question into a lifetime of answered prayers. The cowboy had not smiled since his wife's funeral. Then a stranger asked him for directions home, and in answering her question, he found his own way back to life, to love, to joy. He found his way back to himself, and in doing so, created something far greater than either of them could have imagined on that hot August day in 1878, when their paths first crossed on a Nevada road. It was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that gives hope to the brokenhearted and reminds us all that endings can become beginnings, that loss can lead to finding, that the darkest nights eventually give way to dawn. Nathan and Grace Pierce lived it. Their children inherited it, and now it belongs to anyone who needs to believe that second chances exist, that love is possible even after grief, that asking a simple question can change everything. The end was really a beginning, as the best endings always are, and the home Grace had been seeking was not a place at all, but a person, a partnership, a promise kept across decades. She had asked for directions, and Nathan had given her so much more than that. He had given her a future, and she had given him back his life. And so, their story closed, complete and whole, with every thread tied, every question answered, every promise fulfilled. They had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy not of things, but of love, the kind of love that echoes through generations, the kind that makes the world a little bit better for having existed. On that hillside in Nevada, under the vast western sky, 3 stones marked 3 lives, but they really marked one story, one journey, one beautiful answer to a question asked long ago. Which way is home? The answer, it turned out, was not a direction, but a person, not a destination, but a companion for the journey, not a place, but a promise that said, wherever we are together, that is home.